Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And welcome, everybody, to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. I know you're very excited. Your favorite host of Kentucky's Voice is here. I'm just kidding. The other guys are great, too. But on today's show, we will be discussing, of course, McConnell. He went to the hospital, flu-like symptoms. I think he's doing okay. But he's had a few falls, he's gone to the hospital. What happens if he actually can't complete his term for one reason or another? And that also goes into a discussion about, I think, about hanging on a little too long, maybe, in your positions. We'll discuss. We'll see what you think. Also, in that same vein, we have just today new polling released in the Kentucky Senate or the race to replace McConnell here for the Kentucky Senate seat. Big update, big shifts in the polls, if you're to believe them. We'll go through what the polls say, what's going on, what may be happening. As well, we will be discussing, we've talked, and I'm sure you've heard on the show, discussing about Andy Beshear's travels overseas, of course, recently to Davos, spending just over $40,000, or right at $40,000 or so, to travel to Davos of taxpayer funds. And so the reason why I'm bringing it up now, though, is some recent articles wrote where one Republican, Representative T.J. Roberts, has proposed a bill to help limit this travel. And then the Senate president responded to that bill in exactly the kind of uniparty way you would expect. So we will discuss exactly the ramifications of that bill, that conversation, get your inputs, of course, as well. Also, we have some ICE protesters going on in northern Kentucky that are getting crazier and crazier in what they're demanding. It really shapes for us why we as Republicans, and both nationally and locally, need to be a little bit more focused on completing what we promise for people. When Republicans are making these campaign promises, following through on those, because the other side is absolutely insane, and we will be covering that. Also, we will be, if you haven't heard about it, Senate Bill 122. I think I've talked about it when I was on before, but we will be revisiting that real quick because we're hearing some rumblings, people trying to get it fixed. It's kind of dead as it sits, I guess, but they're trying to make some adjustments, maybe get more people on board. They're out really lobbying hot and heavy for it. I mean, to the point where I'm getting reached out to lobbyists that want this bill. They're begging me to, talk with them in order to agree with them, I guess, on something so they can get something done on this bill. It's a big problem when you're contacting a conservative radio show and podcast host to try to convince them to support your bill, lobbying them like they're a legislator. That just goes to show the power that you all have by listening to the show and making your voices heard to the legislature. I think that's incredibly important. I don't think we talk about it enough. So real quick, as I want to take a moment here while we've got about a minute left before we go to our 1 minute break, to let you know exactly how you can make your voice heard. So if you're hearing about something going on in the state legislature and you want to weigh in on those bills, you can contact the legislative message line by calling 1-800-372-7181. Once again, that's 1-800-372-7181. If you missed that or you need that again, you can visit theandrewshow.com, go to the contact tab, just ask me to send you that number. So that's theandrewshow.com if you want to be resent, that message line number. You don't need to know who your legislators are in order to make your voice heard. You call in, you give them your address, you tell them what bill you're calling on, and they will direct your message to the correct person. So that's very important to do. But I also know you all don't just tune in to hear me talk. You want to get your own opinions across, and you can do that by hitting us up on the Kentucky Voice text line. That number is 502-571-0970. So as I'm talking today, you want to weigh in? Weigh in. You can do that. 502-571-0970. That's our text line. We'll be back here in just a short minute.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. As I'm going through these stories, as I'm talking, you can also weigh in, make your voice heard. I cover those text messages in the final segment, so you can get them in, stack them up. I will be digging through them. I'll reference back to them there in that final segment, but you can send in your opinions on what I'm talking about today by texting 502-571-0970. Once again, that is 502-571-0970. The Kentucky Voice text line. Make your opinions heard. You'll hear them here read on air. Everybody likes to hear their words read out loud by me. I know I do. So McConnell's went to the hospital for flu-like symptoms. Obviously, he's had a lot of health things, and this is unfortunate. While I disagree with a lot of McConnell's votes and politics, at the same time, I can recognize a human being. I don't want any human being to suffer. I don't want any human being life to be rough or anything like that, of course. So as a human, I can recognize that this is a bad thing. But also politically, I think we should discuss the problem I have. Because whenever I bring up the fact that, hey, McConnell's like old and he's not doing too well, people will bring that up to say, well, you know, he's done a lot. How dare you attack his legacy, everything else. The point of bringing that up is to mention, I think, how selfish some of these politicians are. And let me explain, okay? So what happens if McConnell can't make it through his term? Well, prior to about 2-3 years ago, it was pretty clear what would happen. What would happen was the governor would get to appoint somebody to replace that vacant Senate seat to fulfill out the term. So if McConnell passes, Beshear can appoint whomever he wants. It's unclear, too. It seems like he could even appoint himself to that role if he wanted to. But the governor can appoint whomever they want to fulfill that role. And that's it. Now, a few years ago, the legislature passed a law, perhaps indicating the fact that they were concerned about McConnell's health. This was a law that McConnell was pushing in the legislature as well. And that law changed it to where the governor would get to appoint somebody. He would get 3 choices put forward to him by the party that that candidate belonged to. So McConnell, in this case, he belongs to the Republican Party. So the state Republican Party would get to go through a selection process. It's a voting process for them to vote forward 3 people to be suggested as Senate candidate or to be put into the Senate, and then the governor would get to pick between those three people. But that's a recent law change. And chances are that, of course, if a vacancy did open up, that the governor would be fighting against that law. He'd want to appoint whomever he wanted to, even himself, to that role in order to tip it a course for the Democrats in the Senate. He would put in place a Democrat. So there'd be a court fight over this. All that to say, there is no guarantee. There is a law, there's a chance. Now, prior to that law passing, there was no chance a Republican was going to replace McConnell if he couldn't finish out his term. It would have been a Democrat to have grabbed that seat. That law passed after McConnell was already reelected, and now there is a chance, a better than average chance that it would end up being a Republican, but there's still a chance it would end up being a Democrat. And that is something I want to pause on for a second. And this is why I view these people who are older running for office to be extremely selfish, especially when we have this, in the legislature where you have the chance for a governor to replace it. If you're somebody like, let's take somebody like Hal Rogers, right? The replacement process for a congressman is both parties put forward a candidate that they vote on, and then there's a special election, and people actually, like you and I, get to, if you're in that district, get to vote on the replacement. So if you're in a really, really safe Republican seat, and that's how it's filled, is by a special election where the parties get to put forward candidates. The Republican parties themselves within an area put forward a candidate that then gets put onto the ballot to be voted on. Then Democrat parties themselves choose a candidate that they put forward onto the ballot to be voted on in a general election. It's a special election, but a general election to fill that seat. If that's the way it's being filled, okay, if you're in a really safe Republican seat and you want to stay in there till you pass away and you leave that seat vacant, well, that may not be such a big deal because a Republican's going to replace you. But when you're in a position like McConnell was in, when he decided to run for re-election in 2020, which, keep in mind, when he decided to run for re-election, he was 76 or 77 years old. That is a 6-year term. Keep in mind, prior to him deciding to run for re-election, he was already had some health scares, including being hospitalized for a fall. So if you're already in a position, you're 76, 77 years old, that's older, let's just call a spade a spade, you're already having health complications. To bet the political future of the Senate, especially if it's a close Senate where you need that one vote, that one seat, to bet that on you being able to make it another 6 years when you're 76, 77, not trying to be dark, but just being honest, to bet you're going to make it another 6 years when you have health problems, you're 77 years old, that is a very selfish bet. And it's not just, I'm not trying to beat up on McConnell because, of course, you may remember why we have a conservative Supreme Court. Part of the reason why is because of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG. Right? A hero of the left. And really, she shouldn't. She should be a hero to us on the right because she partly gave us the conservative Supreme Court because instead of, she was getting older, having health complications, instead of stepping down while they had a Democrat president, she decided to hold in there and not step down when Obama was in office. And instead, Trump takes over. And she passes away during Trump's term. She knew she was having health problems. And she made a bet, not just 4 years, but 8 years. She would hold on for 8 years because the politics of the situation, if a Supreme Court justice passes away, the Republican in office gets to appoint your replacement. And if they're conservative, if they're Republican, they're going to appoint a Republican. And so Ruth Bader Ginsburg holding on so long to that position is what led to, part of what led to the conservative Supreme Court we have, because she wanted her grasp of power. She cared more about her own grabbing onto power. And so she passed away and a Republican was able to replace her. That is obviously a flaw. That's a problem. We shouldn't be celebrating when people on our, I mean, look, I'll celebrate when people on the left make that folly because it can benefit us. But when people on the right are making that decision that is so selfish and risk the political futures for the rest of us, we shouldn't be celebrating that. That's my point. Yes, we can feel bad. I feel bad that McConnell's going through this. But calling it out isn't being mean. Saying that his decision to run in 2020 was a problem and he was risking too much isn't extreme to say. It's looking at the facts and saying, look, I care about the political future of this country. I care about what we're doing moving forward, and having a Democrat senator in that seat for even a couple of years that then now is set up as the incumbent that can win re-election in Kentucky, potentially giving us 6 more years of a Democrat at least. That's a big risk for McConnell to have taken, and it should be called out. Maybe you have some opinions on this. Maybe you feel differently than I do. Maybe you agree with me. If you want to make your voices heard, you can text the Kentucky Voice text line. I'll go through your text messages there. In the final segment, you can text 502-571-0970. Once again, that phone number, 502-571-0970, the Kentucky Voice text line. Get your opinions in. We're coming up on a break, but what I want to discuss, since we're talking about the McConnell and the Senate seat, is the race to replace McConnell, the race to fulfill that seat on the Republican side, the Republican primary. And we're really focused on the Republicans. You know, we'll talk about the politics of the seat. The chances that this Senate seat in a normal open election ends up with the Democrats is extremely small. Extremely small. Kentucky hasn't voted for a Democrat senator at the federal level since like the 1980s. So it's been, 40, 45 years or so. So it's been a while since we've done it. So it's most likely who wins a Republican primary, like 90% chance becomes the Republican in the Senate. And we've had a big polling update between the 3 major candidates, of course, Daniel Cameron, Andy Barr, Nate Morris. The Morris campaign has released a new poll by the same group that conducted a poll back in August. So we've got some numbers here to go over, and it really shows a big shift in the election, a huge shift. It is certainly tightening up. So we'll be discussing that here when we come back on Kentucky's Voice. Once again, if you want to get in your opinions, you can text 502-571-0970. We'll be back in just a few short minutes.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back here on Kentucky's Voice. Of course, I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooprider. If you want to get your opinions in, you want to weigh in on things, well, you can give us a text, 502-571-0970. Once again, the text line is 502-571-0970. So we're discussing the Kentucky Senate race. There's been a new poll released, this one coming from the Morris campaign. This one coming from the Morris campaign. It's an interesting poll. One thing on a personal note, I believe this poll that they're referencing, I actually answered. I was a person that they called and that they answered. And that answered the poll and went through who I was voting for. I was asked about it. So I'm very familiar. I think I'm very familiar with this poll. And I want to bring that up because I want to get to the results and then some feedback from people. So the current polling, those results off this poll was Cameron at 29%, Andy Barr at 21%, Nate Morris at 18%, and undecided at 29%. Now that represents a huge shift. Okay, because this same group did a poll back in August. Here was the poll back in August, okay? Cameron was at 40%. So that means Cameron has fallen 11%. If this poll is to be believed, 11%. Andy Barr was at 17%. So he's only come up 4 percentage points. And Nate Morris was polling at 5%. That means he's picked up 13%. And that means also the undecided kind of had some shift too as well. But essentially, it looks like Nate Morris picked up a lot of support from Cameron. If you look at the amount Cameron fell at that 11%, you look at Morris, he's up around 18. He picked that up plus some undecideds. It looks like just a shift from Cameron to Morris, which is fascinating, which I find particularly interesting. Now, some people asked me when I was talking about this poll online. I posted about it actually right before I came in here. And some people mentioned, of course, and if you're online at all, you'll see this. There's a lot of very vocal online Michael Ferris supporters out there that are wondering where he falls at in the poll. Look, I was asked the questions for this poll. Ferris was definitely listed in the poll, as well as the other 11 people running. That's right. There's a total of 12 people running for this position. Those people, and you're not going to recognize any of these names, okay? Other than one, other than the 3 or 4 you may know. Other Donald Wenzel, okay? Now, I actually heard this guy talk one time. That's his real name that he has listed on the ballot, Other Donald Wenzel. And he calls himself Other Donald because he's different than Donald Trump. Because, you might confuse Donald Wenzel for Donald Trump when you're voting on the ballot, I guess. You also have a James Duncan, a George Washington. Now, here's what's interesting about George Washington. If it's the same guy that often runs in a primary against Thomas Massey, his middle name is, and look, he legally, I believe, changed his name to this, okay? And to be clear, for all the people out there that are listening closely, his middle name is not the F word, okay, but is fucking. Okay, so his name on the ballot is George F-O-C-K-I-N-G Washington. That's his name on the ballot, okay? We also have Valerie Dr. Val Frederick, Andy Barr, Nate Morris, Jimmy Leon, Nick Shelley, so Nick Shelley, Daniel Cameron, Anissa Catlett, Michael James Ferris, and Jonathan M. Holiday. And now if you go back to the poll I just went through, where I went through those numbers there, 29, 21, 18, then 29% undecided. I don't expect you guys to be super quick with math. I'm not either. I added this up before I talked to you. That leaves 3% unaccounted for. So my guess would be out of those 3% are spread across the other 9 candidates. So when people say, well, are they asking about Ferris? This is something against Ferris. If it's the poll I received, and I believe it is, it did seem like a poll for Morris after I answered the initial questions. That would mean that the 3% that's missing was spread amongst those candidates, and none of the other 9 had a statistically significant percentage. Because you got to keep in mind, right? There's a plus or minus margin of error. So normally it's around 3% or so. So there might be a 3% plus or minus margin of error on this poll. So if you're less than 3%, you are definitionally statistically insignificant in the poll. And as I said, people may come out and say, look, well, I think Michael Ferris is getting a fair shake, or he isn't getting talked about in these polls or anything else. I'm telling you, I was somebody who was polled. He was asked about. You have to understand, too, as you're listening to this, and if you're somebody wondering about all these candidates, I just read through those candidates. That's probably the first and last time you're going to hear any of those candidates' names, most of them, other than 3 or 4 of them, until you get into the voting box. That's going to be it. But going back, though, to what the poll tells us in the shift, a 13% increase for Morris is pretty significant. Now, millions have been spent. Cameron's still holding on the lead at 29%, but he's certainly dropping away. Will he be able to maintain the lead is a lot of questions. A lot of people automatically counting him out of being able to do so. Now, a lot of people show some expression about, we're worried about voting for him. I like him, but I'm worried about voting for him because he'll lose in the general election because he's lost against Andy Beshear. You have to understand that, one, I particularly am not worried about it. As I said early on in the show, whoever the Republican is that wins the primary will, 90% chance they win the seat. It is not the same to compare a Senate race that happens on a normal kind of election year that has a different electorate compared to the off-year governor elections, and to compare an open seat run versus an established person in that role who's an incumbent. Running against incumbents always harder. I'm not particularly worried about it, but some people are. But that shift of Morris really picking up steam, and this is, keep in mind, I don't know if the full Elon Musk endorsement was really able to take effect there. If it's the poll I was asked, they were asking about Elon Musk. It did occur after Elon Musk made the endorsement and decided to dump $10 million into Morris. In my show, the Andrew Cooperrider Show, which you can watch right here on WGTK, or listen to right here on WGTK, Sundays at 6 p.m. and watch it in WBNA Wednesdays at 11, I did mention the fact that if Donald Trump makes an endorsement in this race, I think there's a chance he doesn't make any endorsement, but if he makes an endorsement in this race, there is no way Morris doesn't get at least one of the endorsements if it's multiple, or if he's going to get a solitary endorsement, it's going to be Morris. If Trump makes a solitary endorsement, Morris will get that endorsement. He is supported by Donald Trump Jr. I don't know if he's officially endorsed him yet, but I mean, Nate Morris declared on Donald Trump Jr.'s podcast. He's endorsed by Elon Musk. He was Charlie Kirk's last endorsement before he was assassinated. Erica Kirk supports Nate Morris. He's got Vivek Ramaswamy's endorsement. He's good friends with J.D. Vance. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump doesn't endorse that J.D. Vance may get involved and endorse in the race too as well. I don't think, unless he's trying to stay out of it, maybe for future political wins. I don't know. But you look at that list of supporters that Morris has, that he has a lot of connections to, who's vocally supported him, who will be vocally supporting him, who's supporting him behind the scenes as well. And I don't see Trump going against all those people around him and endorsing somebody else. And so if Morris is already surging at this point with that Trump endorsement, I certainly think it puts him over the top. If he secures that solitary endorsement, I believe he's going to win. We'll be back in a few short minutes.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider, discussing the politics. If you want to make your voice heard, you want to join into the conversation, shoot us a text, 502-571-0970, 502-571-0970. Turning now to discuss a little bit about the governor's travels. I'm sure you've heard it on the show before. You know, Bashir last week went off to Davos, met with Alex Soros, and in the process, he spent $40,000 of taxpayer funds now to send him and his wife there. Now, he justifies this by claiming it was for economic development. He had no specific projects he announced. He has no specific details for us on how that led to economic development. He says, you know, you'll see in the next coming months, you'll see exactly how fruitful that trip is. Because, you know, it was really fruitful, let me tell you, you know, supposedly. So we'll see. We'll see. But putting that to the side for a second, we did get a look at what he spent money on. And one of the things that sticks out is, you know, his hotel rooms, for example. He's spending $600, $700, $800 a night per hotel room, per night on hotel rooms while he was traveling. It's funny, too, because he spent that $40,000, and I'm assuming him and his wife will share a hotel room too. Like I'm doing that based upon the amount of people that went divided by their hotel costs, divided over the number of nights they stayed. But I'm assuming one room per person. I would hope his wife stayed with him. Or maybe she didn't. I don't know. I mean, maybe she's like, maybe they're at that point in their relationship where they sleep in separate rooms. I don't know. I'm not here to judge, okay? If you hate your spouse and you want to sleep in separate rooms, that's up to you to do if you want to do it. I think you're staying married for the kids. That's good for you. I'm not saying that's what goes on in the Bashir household, though if it isn't what's going on, if they're not staying in separate rooms, then that cost per room is actually a lot more than $600-700 at night. Those are some fancy hotels. It's, people sitting there saying, oh, you clearly haven't traveled Europe if you're calling this out. Actually, I have traveled Europe recently. I spent like $25,000 on 3 weeks for 3 people. That's a fair amount different than spending $40,000 in like 4 days, 5 days, which is what he spent. That's a big difference. Definitely didn't fly coach. We can say that. But anyway, so taking an aim, though, because Bashir's traveled overseas a lot on the taxpayer's dime. The TJ Roberts, Representative Roberts, has filed a new bill, House Bill 317, which would require approval from the state treasurer for a governor to travel out of state using public dollars. Sounds great, right? It's House Bill 317. And by the way, if you want to call your legislator and tell them to support something like House Bill 317, House Bill 317, that was, once again, if you want to support tapping down on the governor's travel, you want to support that bill, you can do that by calling 1-800-372-7181. Once again, that legislative line is 1-800-372-7181. But anyway, so he proposes this bill, Representative Roberts does, to help tamp this down, that says, look, somebody else other than just Bashir has to sign off on Bashir traveling. There has to be a check here. It's getting a little out of control. And so there's an article wrote in the Herald Leader about this subject, and they went to President Stivers of the state Senate. So the state Senate has a Senate president, and it's Robert Stivers, Senator Stivers. And so they went to Senator Stivers, and they asked him his opinion. And this is what he had to say. Okay, I'm quoting now from the article. When asked if there was an appetite in the Senate Republican caucus for Roberts' bill, Stivers said there probably is some support, but in quotations now, you have to be careful in what you're doing. There are times in which a governor needs to travel that there won't be an immediate notice or ability to do that. And that would apply again to a Republican or a Democrat. You have to think about the process, Stivers said. So first, let's rewind. If Kentucky passed something like House Bill 317, we wouldn't be the only state to do that. Arkansas has this bill in place where somebody else who's elected has to sign off on the governor's travels. Okay, that's already, other states have this. But also he says, well, a governor may need to travel. In what situation, please tell me, in what situation would a governor have to get on a plane and fly somewhere and be unable to go to the state treasurer? They work in the same city, okay? Go to the state treasurer and say, hey, can you sign off on this? It's not like Bashir's like a firefighter that works somewhere else that has to go respond to a wildfire. We're talking about out-of-state travel, too. Not just travel, out-of-state travel. Using taxpayer funds. In what situation would Bashir have to need more than, a day's notice for that? And the treasurer couldn't sign off on it. It's not like we're saying that the legislature needs to be called back into session to vote on whether or not Bashir can do the travel. We're saying that the state treasurer, the person in charge of watching taxpayer funds, has to approve the travel. Somebody else has to agree it's useful. But this is a common refrain from Republicans a lot of time. You may ask yourself, why is it that our Republican legislature lets this governor just run wild? Why is it they let him spend money willy-nilly? Why is it they continue to let him spend money on ridiculous things? I mean, I've covered in this show things like hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on drag shows, literally spent on drag shows to push vaccines, hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on all kinds of crazy LGBTQ stuff. $1 million spent buying distilling equipment for a private distilling company in Paris. Really, $1 million of your taxpayer funds went to that. $100,000 for a car wash, to redo a car wash for somebody. $30,000 for T-shirt equipment to help a company print out equipments. Spending hundreds, like $500,000 in an apartment to build quote unquote affordable housing. An apartment, $500,000. Why is it they won't rein him in? And this is why. Because every single legislator thinks one day they might be governor. And they don't want to limit their own powers. And if you think I'm making this up, let's rewind to COVID. As many of you are aware, is very active, very vocal during COVID, very active and vocal, and reining in the governor's powers during COVID. I took huge issue with it. Of course, I owned a coffee shop in Lexington that refused to shut down during the mandates. It was a big story, went around national, everything else. I fought him on this, held protests, everything, fought hard. And I worked with a lot of legislators to try to rein in his out-of-control behavior, his dictatorial behavior. And one of the common refrains I got from especially the people in leadership, Republicans in leadership is, well, Andrew, one day we may have a Republican governor. You don't want to limit what the Republican governor can do you? Yeah, I do. I don't care what initial you put next to their name. I don't care if it's an R. I don't care if it's a D. I don't care if it's an I, an L, a P, LMNOP, QRS. I don't care what initial you have next to their name to dignify their party. I want no governor to be able to run roughshod like happened during COVID. I want no governor to be able to go to churches and harass people going to church, expressing their First Amendment. I want no governor to put in place any kind of vaccine mandates, backdoor or otherwise. I want no governor to be able to go to a private coffee shop owner and say, you have to lose everything and shut down or else. I don't want any governor to be able to travel over to Davos willy-nilly without somebody else signing off on it, because it's really hard to see how it benefits anyone but themselves. I don't want anybody able to do that. So no, we don't have agreement. And see, this goes into the thing. If Republicans just fall, it's so weird. During election time, they make all these promises and they get voted in on those promises to be the most conservative to have ever conserved. And then when they get into office, what do? Do they follow through on that? Not at all. Almost every single time, other than a select few representatives and senators I could give you examples of, fail to follow through on their campaign promises. And then they sit there and wonder why people want, at the national level, they're sitting there wondering, I think Republicans are probably going to lose the House in this next election. Maybe they don't. But when that happens, they're going to be sitting there wondering, how'd this happen? How'd we lose the House? Maybe we need to act more like Democrats. No, what happened is you didn't follow through on your campaign promises. You didn't follow through on what you said you would do. And nobody wanted to turn out and vote for you. That's what happened. And yet they get it in their minds that they're just like, well, I was elected to be a Republican. I was elected on these policy promises. So if I follow through on those policy promises, I will lose office. That's how they think. And we can't have them continue to make these kinds of follies because the other side is absolutely insane. They're crazy. They live in their own realities. Their values, what they think is good and bad, is all kinds of messed up. And you need no better example of this than this group in Northern Kentucky called Northern Kentucky Against ICE, NKY Against ICE. When you take a look at what they're protesting, they're showing to the fiscal courts and throwing a fit about what? Well, they're throwing a fit, and they continue to do this. They're throwing a fit about ICE operations in Kentucky. You may be sitting there wondering to yourself, I haven't seen like a whole lot about ICE operations in Kentucky. What are you talking about? Well, we'll be discussing that when we get back, but I know you want to get your voice heard. So if you want your text read out on air, you want me to opine on something, go ahead and shoot us a text, 502-571-0970. Once again, that Kentucky Voice text line, 502-571-0970. Shoot in those texts. We'll be answering those in the next segment. We'll see you in a few short minutes.
Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you are back here on Kentucky's Voice, your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. I am... Sorry, I'm going through the text. So if you want to get in your text, you want to get in your text messages here, you can go ahead, shoot in the text 502-571-0970. Once again, that text line, get in your text 502-571-0970. Here's a text that came in. It says, McConnell has damaged Republican candidates nationally by withholding party support. Senator Rick Scott, Florida, for Senate Majority Leader. Time is long past for McConnell to retire. Cameron has the best overall experience. He stood up to Bashir as a G. Well, to be clear, in the Senate race, I'm undecided. I do have to moderate a few debates for them and continue to engage with all the campaigns for Senate. So I'm not going to publicly weigh in on who I would vote for until maybe the very, very last minute. But to your point about McConnell withholding money from Republican candidates, that's right. See, McConnell has a lot of aversion to like strong Republicans. He wants the weak, uniparty type Republican. So he'll withhold party support. And that does hurt Republicans. And it's important that we can't let ourselves shift left. Moderate. What is a moderate has shifted. As the Overton window, as the left has just gotten absolutely insane, what is the definitional middle has shifted left as well. If you remember, the Democrats of the 90s talk like the Republicans of today. They do. Why is that? Well, it's because the middle has shifted and the Republican leadership likes the moderates because they think they can win better with them. But we can't allow these insane people to keep moving things. I mentioned this before the break. You have this Northern Kentucky against ICE. They're showing up at fiscal courts in Northern Kentucky protesting the ICE agreements, ICE operations in Kentucky. But the ICE operations in Kentucky aren't like they are in Minnesota. Why is that? Well, it's because what they're exactly protesting is when somebody in when a police department or sheriff's department in Northern Kentucky picks up somebody, arrests somebody for something else, whether it is DUI, stealing, theft, assault, rape, robbery, whatever it may be. And they pick them up and they go through their social security and everything else, and they realize that, oh, this isn't a U.S. citizen. They've overstayed their visa. As they're dealing with their other charges and they have to deal with those, they let ICE know, hey, we've got this person. They were arrested for stealing or whatever. They overstayed their visa or they're here illegally. ICE then can decide to issue an ICE detainer in which these local police departments will hold these illegal immigrants for a few days for ICE to come pick up and do the deportation process. So what they're protesting in these agreements exactly is that the police, when they arrest somebody for another crime, discover they're illegal immigrants, they let ICE know. They're literally protesting to keep not just illegal immigrants, but illegal immigrants who are committing other crimes in their community. Like, these illegal immigrants are committing other crimes. They're lawbreakers in your community. They've been arrested for something. And you're protesting to keep them there. To be like, no, let them free. I don't care how minor the crime is. We should have zero crime from illegal immigrants. It's a net negative. And that's what they're throwing a fit about. These people are literally insane. Going through messages and texts, if you want to shoot over your message, 502-571-0970. Once again, that's 502-571-0970. We just got another one here. Let's take a look. First it says, oh no, that was yesterday. It says, what legally happens for those harboring illegal aliens, including citizens, churches, and NGOs? I mean, there's what legally should happen. I mean, you're harboring an illegal immigrants, right? You're helping them out. You're facilitating somebody in the action of a crime. So you should be held accountable for facilitating that crime. But as of right now, nothing's happening to them. Not only is nothing happening to them, we're funding them. We're continuing to fund these NGOs. You know, Doge went through and found all this waste, right? And then when you look at this most recent funding bill that just passed at the national level, it was Tommy Tuberville, senator from Alabama. He had this quote on the spending bill. I read it just this morning, so I got to find it. He basically said that the spending bill was full of garbage, full of trash. They're funding all kinds of things they shouldn't be, that they're funding a lot of the things that Doge found waste in, but he voted yes anyways because it's the best they're going to get. So not only are they not being punished, but they are also being funded by our tax dollars, which is great. Someone else texted in and said, I agree with you over McConnell's recent control of Republican funds. 22 and 24, he cost us at least 2 senators, plus he backed Lisa Murkowski over a true Republican. Yeah, he is, McConnell is known for being, let me explain the mindset of these Republicans, right? To explain it, okay? They would rather be in charge of the minority party, meaning the party that doesn't have the majority, right? So they'd rather have only 48 Republican senators and be in control than have 55 Republican senators and them not get to lead the tribe because they care about themselves. And we know that from McConnell because of the very fact that he ran in the first place at the age of 77 with health issues, risking that seat falling to a Democrat. Let's see, we got a few more messages coming in. You can join in, 502-571-0970. Here we go. Got one here that said, What will it take to get the right, or at least anyone who's not an insane Marxist, to show up and voice their opinions en masse the way the left does? So one thing you have to understand, people on the right, they have jobs, they have families, right? Obviously. So they're not as there, but they're not as available to do some of these things. Also, when the right was very vocal and voiced their opinion when something they viewed as happening bad to them. The same thing on the left, right? The left isn't going to show up and protest in support of something that's currently happening that they agree with. They come out en masse, if you notice, during Trump years, because they're protesting something that is happening that they are against. They're trying to stop something. And just from working in the activism side of things, I know it's easier to get people to try to stop something than it is to try to get them to start something, to protest in favor of getting something done compared to protesting in favor of stopping something else from happening. And there's another thing too to go into this psychology. I believe it was, she was that girl that graduated from college with a rifle slung on her back. I think her name's Gabby. Anyways, I saw a video she did online where she talked about what is happening with these people showing up, these crazy leftists. And frankly, it's that they're mama bears, right? This idea of a mama bear, very empathetic, cares about people and things. Normally that energy, that empathetic, I will protect this person with all I have energy is spent on their kids. It's ingrained into us, into women especially, because they're there to protect their children. That's why they have that tendency. Not trying to be sexist or anything. It's just true. Women have an innate desire to protect something. An innate desire to like really shield something that they see as somebody who's weaker or needs defended. That energy comes from the desire to, nature's desire to get women to defend their children. However, when they don't have children to expend that on, it goes crazy sometimes. And that leads to where you see these crazed left. They're called, in case you guys haven't heard this term online, they're called AWFLs. AWFL. That is AWFLs, and it stands for Affluent White Female Liberal. Okay, AWFLs. Affluent White Female Liberals. And these AWFLs have nothing else in their lives of greater meaning. So instead of expending this mama bear energy protecting their kids, they expend it protecting an illegal immigrant that robs people and rapes people. It doesn't make any sense. It's absolutely insane. But that's what happens when your social fabric falls apart. Crazy things end up happening. Let's see here. Another message coming in. Oh, somebody had asked about how do we know about Bashir spending? I mentioned Bashir spent $40,000 overseas. How do we know? This could be a good step, too, to opening up a little bit more transparency. In order to find out what Bashir had spent on these trips, you have to file an open records request. You can go on my social media at KY Cooperwriter on X, or just search Andrew Cooperwriter on Facebook. And you can find where I posted from it. So you have to file an open records request for the travel information, and then you will get that request fulfilled. And within a few days, they send it back to you, and you end up getting to see the documents. So it's not publicly available information. You do have to file a special open records request, but I do have that posted on my social media if you wanted to go ahead and take a look at it. Looking now here, trying to look at, here we go. Another one sent here. Someone said, Nate Morris is a successful businessman. Government is business. There's a part of that too, that certainly it doesn't mean he's unexperienced. Now, some people look at it and say, well, hasn't been elected before like Andy Barr and Daniel Cameron, so he's unexperienced. But obviously leading a large company and building a company, becoming worth hundreds of millions of dollars, that certainly takes a different kind of experience. One we might benefit from more in the government. I hear those arguments. But there's a lot of things to weigh here. as far as what's important, what's not there. Well, you all, we're coming up on the end. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like what we talked about today, you can check out The Andrew Cooperrider Show by visiting theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. I'll be back here next week on Kentucky's Voice, but Kentucky's Voice will be on tomorrow, same time, same place, just a different voice, a different face, delivering you all that fantastic information you desire. We'll see you back here tomorrow.